วัสดีค่ะเด็กๆยินดีต้อนรับเข้าสู่การบวกและการลบเศษส่วน adding and subtraction ใน EP 4 กับครูชุธารินีนะคะวันนี้เราจะมาเรียนซิว่าการบวกลบเศษส่วนมีอย่างไรบ้างนะคะซึ่งแบบแรกก็คือการบวกลบเศษส่วนในกรณีที่ตัวส่วนเป็นตัวเดียวกันเดี๋ยวเราไปดูวิดีโอกันเลยค่ะ
In this video, we're going to learn the basics about how to add fractions. Now, a lot of math books will teach you how to add fractions before they teach you how to multiply them. But here at Mathantix, we think you should learn the other way around. You remember how easy it is to multiply fractions, right? You just multiply the top numbers together, and you multiply the bottom numbers together, and you have your answer. So you might be wondering, well, can't we just do that with addition too? Can't we just add the top numbers together and add the bottom numbers together and get our answer? Well, all right, let's try it and see, but I got a bad feeling about this. Let's try adding 1/2 to 1/2. So if we added the top numbers, we'd get 2, and if we added the bottom numbers, we'd get 4. But, well, that can't be right, because 2 over 4 simplifies to 1/2. And if you add 1/2 and 1/2, you should get a whole, not a half. Uh-oh, we must have broke some sort of math rule. I'm out of here. Okay, here's what we did wrong. It turns out that there's some important math rules called order of operations that say you have to do multiplication and division before you do addition and subtraction. Now, because fractions are just division problems, if you just added the top numbers and added the bottom numbers, you'd be breaking those rules because you would be doing the addition before the division. So, what are we going to do instead? Well, fortunately, there's a trick that lets us work around the order of operation rules and add fractions without dividing. But there's a catch. It only works for fractions that have the same bottom numbers. The trick is, if fractions have the same bottom numbers, we can add them by just adding the top numbers together and keeping the same bottom number in our answer. For example, to add 1/2 and 1/2, we just add the top numbers, and 1 plus 1 gives us 2. But we don't add the bottom numbers. We just use the same bottom number in the answer, which is 2. So 2 over 2 is a whole fraction. And that makes sense because if you add 1/2 and 1/2, you get a whole. Let's see a few more examples. Like this one, 5 over 16 plus 2 over 16. Again, since the bottom numbers are the same, it's easy to add these fractions. All we do is add the top numbers together. 5 plus 2 equals 7, and that's the top number of our answer. Then we just keep 16 as the bottom number of our answer. So 5 over 16 plus 2 over 16 equals 7 over 16. Pretty easy, huh? But what about subtracting fractions? Does that work the same way? Yep, if the bottom numbers are the same, all you have to do is subtract the top numbers and keep the same bottom number in your answer. Here's an example of subtracting fractions with the same bottom numbers. 5 over 9 minus 2 over 9. First we subtract the top numbers. 5 minus 2 equals 3. Then we just write the same bottom number in our answer, 9. So 5 over 9 minus 2 over 9 is 3 over 9. Yep, adding and subtracting fractions with the same bottom numbers is easy. And there's a special name for problems like this. It's called adding or subtracting like fractions. A teacher once told me that they're called like fractions because the bottom numbers are the same, or alike. But I think it's because they secretly like each other. Just kidding. But seriously, like fractions are easy to add with the trick we just learned. But what happens if you want to add two unlike fractions? What do you do if you have fractions with different bottom numbers? Unfortunately, the only way we can add unlike fractions without doing the division first is to change them so that they do have the same bottom numbers. In other words, we need to change our unlike fractions into like fractions so we can just use our trick. In math language, that's called finding a common denominator. Now remember that a denominator is just a fancy math word for the bottom number of a fraction. And common just means that they're the same. So, how do we find a common denominator so that we can add or subtract unlike fractions? That's what we're going to learn in the next video. But before you move on, be sure to do the exercises for this section. Learn more at mathantix.com.
เป็นยังไงกันบ้างคะเด็กๆสำหรับการบวกลบเศษส่วนในกรณีที่ส่วนเป็นตัวเดียวกันแล้วหลังจากนี้ถ้ากรณีที่ตัวส่วนคนละตัวกันนักเรียนจะทำยังไงเดี๋ยวเราไปดูในวิดีโอกันได้เลยค่ะ
In the last video, we learned how to find what I like to call the easiest common denominator. And personally, I prefer to use that method of getting a common denominator whenever I can, because it's quick and easy to remember. But I can think of at least two cases where it would be better to use a different method to convert unlike fractions into like fractions. The first case is when one of the fraction's bottom numbers is a multiple of the other fraction's bottom number. And the second case is when your teacher says that you have to use this other method. This new method is called finding the least common denominator, because it involves using the smallest common denominator we can find instead of just using the product of the bottom numbers like we did in the first method. To find the smallest or least common denominator of two fractions, we need to figure out what the smallest or least common multiple of the two bottom numbers is. Now, in case you've forgotten, a multiple of a number is just the result of multiplying it by another whole number, like 1, 2, or 3. So here's what we're going to do to find the least common denominator, or LCD for short. First, we'll take the two different bottom numbers and start making multiples of each of them. We start with 1 times the numbers, and then 2 times, and then 3 times, and 4 times, and so on. It helps to arrange these multiples in a small table, almost like a scoreboard, so that you can keep things organized and easy to find. We'll stop making multiples as soon as we find an answer that's the same for both numbers. That answer is called the least common multiple, and it will become our new common denominator. Once we know what the least common denominator is, we have to figure out which whole fractions we'll need to multiply our unlike fractions by to get equivalent fractions with that common denominator. The solution is to use the same numbers that resulted in the common multiple. For example, if you multiplied by 4 to get the common multiple for the first unlike fraction, then you'll use 4 over 4 as your whole fraction. And if you multiplied by 3 to get the common multiple for the second unlike fraction, then you'll use 3 over 3 as your whole fraction for it. Have I lost you yet? Should make a lot more sense after you've seen a few examples. Let's start with this problem. 3 over 8 plus 5 over 24. Step 1 is to take our two bottom numbers and make multiples of them to see if we can find a common multiple. First, let's multiply them both by 1. Well, that's easy. We have 8 and 24. Next, we multiply them both by 2, and that gives us 16 and 48. I still don't see anything in common, so let's multiply them both by 3. 3 times 8 is 24, and 3 times 24 is 72. But look, we have something in common now. We have a 24 in each column. We have found the least common multiple of the numbers 8 and 24, and it happens to be 24. That makes sense if you remember your multiplication tables, that 3 times 8 equals 24. So now we know we're going to use 24 as our common denominator. But what whole fractions do we need to get it? The answer lies in our multiples chart. To get our common multiple, we had to multiply our 8 by 3. So we're going to use the whole fraction 3 over 3 for our first fraction. And our common multiple for 24 was just itself. We multiplied by 1. So we could use the whole fraction 1 over 1, but we really don't need to since multiplying by 1 won't change anything. We already have the denominator of 24 on that side, so we don't need to change it. Okay, now we multiply. On top, 3 times 3 gives us 9, and on the bottom, 8 times 3 gives us 24, just like we wanted. Now we have like fractions, and we can use our simple procedure to add them. We add the top numbers, 9 plus 5 equals 14, and we keep the same bottom number, 24. Okay, ready for one more example? Let's find the LCD for these fractions, 2 over 9 and 7 over 12. Again, let's start by making a list of multiples for our two bottom numbers to look for a common multiple. 9 times 1 is 9, and 12 times 1 is 12, of course. 9 times 2 is 18, and 12 times 2 is 24. 9 times 3 is 27, and 12 times 3 is 36. 9 times 4 is 36. Aha! We found it. 36 is the least common multiple of 9 and 12. So we'll use that as our common denominator. Now let's figure out which whole fractions we need to use to make our fractions have that denominator. We use 4 over 4 for our first unlike fraction, since 4 times 9 was 36. And we use 3 over 3 for our second unlike fraction, because 3 times 12 was 36. There. Now when we multiply, we get two new but equivalent fractions that have a common denominator. Now we can add them with our simple procedure. On the top, 8 plus 21 equals 29, and we keep the same bottom number, 36. So that's how you use the least common denominator method. And it's really not that hard once you get the hang of it. So don't forget to do the exercises for this video, because the way to really learn math is to do it. Good luck, and I'll see you next time. Learn more at mathantics.com.
ค่ะเป็นยังไงกันบ้างคะเด็กๆหลังจากที่เราได้เรียนรู้จากวิดีโอไปเรียบร้อยแล้วนั้นนะคะเราจะนำความรู้ที่ได้จากที่เราเรียนมาทำแบบฝึกหัดในไลฟ์เวิร์กชีตนะคะซึ่งเป็นเกี่ยวกับการบวกลบเศษส่วนในกรณีที่ส่วนเป็นตัวเดียวกันและกรณีที่ส่วนคนละตัวกันใบงานมีทั้งหมด3ใบงานนะคะให้นักเรียนเข้าไปในลิงก์ที่ครูให้นะคะแล้วก็ไปทำไลฟ์เวิร์กชีตหลังจากนั้นนะคะให้นักเรียนส่งเข้าไปในนั้นและแคปหน้าจอส่งครูนะคะสวัสดีค่ะ